All right, let's call the meeting to order at 8:15. Begin with a pledge of allegiance and the flag. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we're keeping up. Hold on a second. All right. We have a very important but relatively short list of things to do tonight. So let's begin with the results of the referendum vote. Somebody report the actual results.
They're not official, but I have the
We don't have official yet. They're not official, but we can operate on the unofficial results, which showed a majority for all four of the proposals on the ballot. All right.
What was the total number of the voters? Approximately
1,125. 1,125. And
so that's about 6.
let's say 6.4%. All right, so our job tonight then will be to take the information of the approved budgets and to discuss and then set the mill rate based on what we know today, which is still less than perfect information. So we have a handout that will basically move us from where we were at the meeting 2 weeks ago and look at the numbers that we know today and talk about any differences or things that we know today that were different 2 weeks ago. Not much. So, start with these. Unfortunately, you don't have these, Jeff. I can try to, when Sean sits down, he'll email them to you.
It should be no different than what we saw 2 weeks ago, correct?
We're going to just, there's a couple minor differences.
Well, then I have a version, so I did go ahead and print a motion.
Okay.
That's
All right, why don't we do that?
last time. So, start with A.
Sean's instincts are better than mine.
I just thought we might, well, that's all right. Start with A. So it's correct, right? They are, so extras there. And then we get to C. Start
Now,
now.
go ahead and pass it
All right,
out.
that's it.
Three scenarios.
Well, it's just sort of getting, in the absence of a known ability to project this on the screen, this is kind of a way to get to the discussion.
Yeah, so we'll walk you through A, B, and C. So,
Right.
So A is the where we ended up with the decision to refer these budgets, the expense budgets, to the referendum. So that was including $1 million reduction in the Board of Ed budget, $250,000 reduction in the Board of Selectmen budget, which is layered in here in a couple of different places, and adding that $2.5 million contingency to the Board of Selectmen budget as a way to deal with the prospect of state mandated push down expenses for the town. We similarly took additional contingencies from the revenue side, which are negative. They're in bold under the bottom line of the green section, revenues, state revenue contingencies. And then we were applying $1.5 million, full absorption of the Hartford, but the rest of any adjustment to reserves is in the form of the state revenue contingency and the expense. We didn't want to label, we decided not to label them as use of general reserves, especially given volume. We'll talk about volume in just a minute. So this is where we were when we left a week ago Tuesday. What's that? Hey Jeff, would you mute yours just so the background noise? How to do that?
glad I'm not the only technology challenged person around.
All right? We can't hear you now. That's good. All right. If you need us, if you come off mute and we will pick it up, all right? All right. Okay, great. So B is the, represents things that have changed since 2 weeks ago, and things that we want to, Sean and I talked about. So Sean, let's walk through these. So,
Yeah, so like you said, A was where we left off. It's only very slightly adjusted. It was 40.07. We did get more favorable information from the assessor on new construction prorates just yesterday, so it ticked it down. You may notice it's 0.02 mils less than we left it last time, so a little bit more favorable information there. But right, so we go from the 40.05. The difference on B now is because the state did not pass a budget, and after kind of numerous conversations with council and seeing what other towns are doing, but the current state law is we cannot be higher than 32 mils on the car tax. So I know we talked about this a couple times, but our council says even though it's pretty likely that the final budget will probably involve repealing that requirement that you got to 32, as of today, it hasn't happened. It would be against the state statutes. So we need to adjust something that we had in A, which was the assumption that we'd be at 36 mils. Again, the law is 37.
So we had, one of the budgets had the rate still at 32, but there was, I think one of Malloy's budgets assumed that we would get reimbursed as we did last year. And now, so this one, so there are three possible ways to look at this. One is they'll let us charge our 37 total, which would be 36 to the town, plus 1 for the fire district. And we can keep the money. That's a more favorable, that's a change from last year.
With a small state reimbursement in that scenario. So we are still reducing from 38, but you'll see the 221 is on that.
Okay. The second scenario is that they hold to the 32, net 31 to the town, and they give us no money for it. All right, that's the worst case. And so what we've done is Sean and I, on this B, said we're going to end up, is that B or C?
B is, we don't get the additional A. Right.
Right. So that's why it jumps up to 4055. We only get 221,000, which is a similar reimbursement to what we got last year.
And are not allowed to upcharge to the 37.
Correct.
36, I'm sorry.
Right.
Plus the-
Yeah. All right. Everybody follow that? So that put us up to 40.55 with 12% reserves, plus the built-in reserves in the form of the contingencies.
I'm sorry, if I could just interrupt for 1 second, because I thought we were at 2.5 and negative 2.5. The
Negative
1.9,
It's a combination of the 2.5 and the reserves that we had previously talked about.
Yep.
Last time.
for the 600 thing.
We lumped them together. We did that at the meeting, but we didn't print it out or.
Gotcha.
And the two-
also you're assuming on this that the car tax drops to 32, we get the same aid as last year, but they don't make up the additional difference because our taxes are going up. Is that correct?
That's the theory.
All right. So this is a 5.74 combined tax increase. So what we talked about today, Sean and I, and I want us to discuss as a board, is looking at a compromise scenario, which is to split the difference between either the third, we can charge for 37, that 36 to the town, or we get reimbursement from the state and it's not the full amount. So we're basically putting in $650,000 of either additional tax revenue we would get. If we could charge the 36, it would be more than this, correct?
Right.
Or
So this is C.
C.
So I'm not quite following C. So you're saying
Okay.
we are going to assume in C that the car tax stays, the cap stays at 32,
Yes.
and we get
Some reimbursement.
Half of the governor's proposed reimbursement.
And what is his proposed payment?
It was $1.3 million.
Okay, but I mean, that's the same as last year that we got, or?
No, because last year we were at 37 mils.
That's the total difference between.
The delta between 37 mils and 32 mils is 36 and 31.
Okay.
As the state calculates it, was an additional one. From 220.
Last year.
That's last year, current fiscal year.
Yeah.
But in no case in any of these are we assuming that the state is ever going to make us whole to our actual mill rate. So the
The
more we
40,
raise
no.
the mill rate, the bigger the gap gets, right?
No, the way the statute was originally written is it's based on your grand list as to grand list to go. So and then how much you lost when they were setting that by.
We were never going to be able to charge 40 mils against the cars.
Unless they completely repeal the entire statute.
Completely change
Also
everything.
possible.
Which they
We just don't,
won't because of the earth.
nobody's proposed that. As far as I know.
So then what I asked Sean to do, and the result of this was to say what combination of reserve use, grand list, minor grand list adjustments, this car tax in the middle would bring us to a mill rate below 40, 39.99. And so that would be the about $720,000 additional use reserves and leave us with 11.2 calculated reserves against the $96.6 million budget.
So in A, sorry, slow here. In A, you're assuming we don't get hit at all with car tax.
No, yeah, in A, correct, that's where we were last week, or 2
The
weeks.
difference between A and C is just the amount of reimbursement from the state.
It's just half versus whole.
No, it's 600 and some thousand versus 200 and some thousand that we got this fiscal year.
Between A and what?
A and C.
The way they're,
It's the mill rate,
Yeah.
it's how you get there, right? So it's
Right.
assuming half of the car, that's right, half of the car, but then it's showing that would leave us potentially $720,000 of reserves short. And what they're trying to do is show where the reserve position would end, just to be like.
Just to recap though, remember we have, before we talk about our reserves, we have $5 million gross of contingencies for negative impact in the state. In this,
current,
in all-
aside from the car tax.
Aside from the car. Yes.
No, it would be 12.
Wait, which one?
Because the contingent rate is so we would go, is really, A, we go back to, so you want to A, you put in a $5 million contingency, and then left our reserves at 12%. Is that correct?
Say that again, Tim.
So if we, on sheet A, we had a built-in $5 million contingency, which left us a reserve balance of 12%, is that correct?
We were using,
I thought you just said 2, right?
there's 600,000 of reserve use in that.
Yeah.
It gets added back to the $1.9 million.
Right. It's really $4.4 million of contingency.
We could have done.
We were trying to show what the ultimate impact
A C minus would have been,
Right, so then we go to C, if we go to C, we add another $720 million in reserves, that brings us down to 11.2.
that's what's.
And then so we got 5.1 contingency overall. Would that be correct what you said?
it's in that order of magnitude. So I guess the question for the board that I would phrase it this way is, with the contingencies and the reserves, are we, the calculated difference between B and C is the difference between, I think B is high. I think B is high because it's not giving us, there's no compromise at all for the car tax. It's saying worse in both cases.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought some sort of compromise there. The question is, if we didn't take additional reserves, we just took half of what we thought the state might reimburse, or half of the impact of charging 36, we'd be at 40.03.
So 6.1%.
Yeah. Right. So this is, it's real money, but it's optics too, which is, or do we want to do 40? We hated it when the state talked about the sales tax at 6.99. But,
I mean, I personally think it's prudent to anticipate some type of it's the whole thing.
From the state, you
From
mean?
the state, from the company.
Okay. What about and then it's, throwing darts in terms of what the actual impact is across the board. I guess my question is, what, other than the tax collection rate, if, in terms of refreshing our reserves, as we see about 720,000 is about 8 basis points or 80 basis points in terms of total reserve percentage. What other ways can we refresh our reserve? One is if they do pass a budget that the impact to the town is less than the 5 million, correct? But I know we have other alternatives, making appropriations, et cetera, but that would be one way, as well as collecting more than what we're assuming in the tax collection rate.
yeah, so let me just state, make a few points relative to those. Those are the salient points.
And I'll tell you, just to finish, where I'm going with that is if we're assuming that we're going to use reserves next year as well, certainly more than $720,000, then we're talking about having reserves in possibly the 10% range.
I'll give you my view on 2 or 3 of these things that are important. One is, I don't think that I would be recommending going into 11.2 if we didn't also have a fair amount from these contingency payments, which are themselves a guess.
Right.
All right. And I think just from anecdotally, and Lisa can speak to this, I think we were being much more conservative about this whole process than a lot of the towns in terms of the voting. That's not a reason to be improved. Second thing is the level of reserves, 11.2 versus 12.0, is against the budget that has been grossed up by $2.5 million. So if in fact this ends up being all on the revenue side and not on the expense side, we are going to tell the Board of Selectmen they can't really spend that $2.5 million. And our reserves will be as a percent of the net lower budget. I think that's arithmetic, but it's important to think about. Second thing, let's say we do this C, and we find out later that the car tax is, in fact, we can only charge 31 and we get no reimbursement from the state. So that's about a $650,000 budget hole right off of that. We have 2 or 3 choices. We could do a supplemental billing for that if we thought it was worth it. Here's another bill for your car tax. Well, all right. We will, by that time, know whether we've estimated enough or not enough on the 2 contingency pieces, so we could do a supplemental tax bill also. Or we could end up with an adjustment, just we'll know going forward what our reserves are, and we'll have a more realistic new age budget than we do today, upon which we can start thinking about next year what time to plan for. So
Let me ask one other question. So say the state, we get higher on our car tax, less on this from the state, we would take, municipal county generally, would be able to take it from.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing with so the catch with the teacher pension piece has always been that is an expenditure item. And so part of the logic behind the $2.5 million budgeted is that the proposal has never been higher than $3.6 million. The last government budget was $3.5 million. So it's between the operating budgets and the ability to do a supplemental appropriation of 1%. If it actually came to all of that, we could make that year. If it was really 3.5 million in total, we could make that bill. And we could pay that expenditure through supplemental appropriation, whatever, from the operating budgets. But we always knew we couldn't get 3.5. Our charter doesn't allow us to do 3.5 million. And that's supplemental to the actual referendum, which is why we did that.
It's on your video.
Okay.
All right, Maura and I can
Yes.
relate. We couldn't hear a thing last
Right,
time.
right, so,
Yeah, I was
It is what it
just saying that 3.5 million has always been the maximum number, the highest number that's been presented by the governor. And so 2.5 gets us within a million, within striking distance of 3.5 if it all came. I do think the most likely scenario, as I haven't heard any legislators that are fully in favor of this, other than maybe a 5-year phase-in.
Of dropping the car tax further or something?
No, I'm sorry, I took the teacher
pension.
And so, you know, a fifth of that 3.5 million might be a realistic expenditure we impact. I personally don't think it's going to actually make it through the budget process, but we may end up losing that 1%. So to your point, I mean, ultimately, the revenue we generate from the car tax, from the mill rate that we set tonight, should be enough to offset those.
It's a very dire scenario, which if we set the mill rate even at 40, that we would not be able to pay our bills and have at least a reasonable reserve. We're not doing anything enormously risky by setting it at that.
So, more 30,000 foot level question, what happens if they don't pass the budget? What happens if the state doesn't?
We still have to pay our bills.
Yeah. Then you get.
Yeah,
zero.
so we,
Is that right? It doesn't refer to the prior year's budget? In which case,
I don't
we
believe
push
so.
that.
I don't think they pay anything out until there's a budget.
They won't pay us.
yeah, they wouldn't be paying us. I mean, I guess in that respect, we're somewhat fortunate that, I mean, 80%, 85% of our revenue is going to be coming. So we would have some time to react to that mid-year, but, yeah, I don't know. Greg, I don't know.
According to the Hartford Current 4 hours ago, they claimed that the governor was preparing to, move forward with his executive, budget if it's not passed by June 30th. And the article noted that without legislative action, the governor could not change the local aid.
Right.
Which means
From
that
what-
was
From what it was last year, which is,
Oh, that's actually.
Which is actually,
Well, from
From last
so-
year or from what was
From
in
the
this
year
budget?
before.
they passed a biennial budget, so there's already a second year built in.
That's actually. Jeff?
I'm saying feel very comfortable with 11.2, certainly been 11%. And we talked logically about the 9 times that we can adjust the, and I got a little comments that Board of Education doing something more systemic, a little more fundamental. And so, even in the worst case scenario, so I know they don't need some dollars, but I do think keeping the building at 40 is still important.
Yeah,
That includes the, it's a customer service as well.
I concur with that. Hence, I helped Sean create Plan C. So,
What are we doing?
So I'm torn between keeping the mill rate at under 40, but the other flip side of that is the 720,000 there's the car tax. Given that this is a multi-year problem, I think I would assume stay at the last one.
A has no impact on the car tax.
Correct, so it's the same as the law is in existence now, right? No, is that B?
No,
No.
no, it's charging. We can't do A, we can't.
B, I'm sorry, B.
So that's a almost 6%, 5.74%
Yep.
increase in taxes. I'm not going to. I think we've reserved and we set aside reserves and we've taken allowances. I think that we're asking the taxpayers today to pay all of what could possibly It could absolutely be worse than B, let's be honest. It could be, but we're
We
saying.
spend an awful lot of time talking about the car tax, and we don't even know what the solid numbers are for the entire
No,
rest of the
that's
budget.
exactly right, that's
And
exactly
that's
right.
why I really want to avoid having to do a supplemental tax.
We would be in essence then taking almost $6 million contingent reserve against the governor's budget, against.
But
the
this
state
last budget
aid
was a $10 million loss, so we're still underestimating.
60% of what the budget. And 11.2%.
And we can always, depending on what the budget outcome is, pay cash for things correctly come up.
You have to, supplemental appropriation.
Yeah, up to.
limits, right.
Well, and can we also hold off on other expenditures that haven't yet been made, like capital? If we discover that in 2 weeks the budget passes and it's way worse than is anticipated, is there more that we can do, we'll pass the capital budget and then go in and say, we shouldn't really do X, Y, Z? Could the Board of Selectmen choose to do that?
Projects that were passed
That-
tonight as part
that
of
were
our.
passed, but-
Well, I think the impact on the 2008, the impact on the 2018 budget from delaying the one approved project would be $200,000.
Okay, but some of them were cash projects.
There are a few, but right, they're not.
Yeah, there's an amount you could.
But it's not
It
moving.
wouldn't
May
be.
not be millions,
Right.
but it's a little bit.
And my concern, I guess, with going over the 40 collecting boards, that I feel like we're, creating almost a floor. And, I think we're pushing this to get more time to the boards, and becoming more self-aware education to think about it, when they do business, give them a full year. I hate to see us end up with, this amount of money and, be so over-reserved, to the extent that the governor's budget and legislation grants something that goes the other direction, more favorably than being collected a ton of money for taxpayers. And don't want the other boards to feel like, that can be there.
Today's, in my mind, you can justify it given the uncertainty of the governor's budget, the $10 million last proposed budget that was presented, which is, and then also the fact that this is a multi-year problem, where you're going to have these same holes next
Over
year.
and over.
Right.
That's true.
I tend to side with more on that. I think spoke about the last grade. The grade for the story doesn't really bother me as much as others.
So we're talking about $1 million in additional taxes.
I'm throwing up already, to be honest with you. So
Exactly.
adding another million is not making me any happier.
But that's based off, that's based off of the car tax going down to 35, right? Is really what it is. That's making the assumption that the car tax is going down to 35.
Just make a quick note that we're using over $2 million in reserves this year. Where do we think that number is going to be next year if things are only going to get worse? And why wouldn't we want to reserve for that? I mean, we understand, yes, there have been some conversations about fundamental changes, okay? That means we basically got to start next week on what we're going to do for next year's budget. But does that mean that everything that we'd like to do, I mean, we will be depending on reserves again, and it'll be more than the 720 that we're, that aren't allocated by an unassigned Hartford 1.5 million. I mean, that's like a bonus to us this year. And we don't even know if that's fully going to, well, it was reserved, but hopefully it gets fully backfilled. I tend to agree with Maura and Kevin on this, and would vote for B.
Our range is 10 to 12%, that's essentially the guideline. So we're in one of the worst scenarios we have, and we're still at this point 11.2%, so we're not even down close to 10. So I just like having more money in it for taxes for taxpayers. I don't feel that
So,
get $7 million.
so in order to get us down to 10%, Sean, how much in reserves would we have to use? So next year,
What would be, well, 1.5, 70, 20, 15, another.
so how much of similar, so it would be $2 million?
Yeah, that's what
Yeah, it's about
$2 million? So we're using $2 million this year in reserves. So if we used another $2 million for next year in reserves, that gets us down to 10%.
And that's where we talk about, capital projects, right? We got the great bond, we got some great ratings this year, and that's a good thing, but you can't tell me that the state credit doesn't somehow influence the town credit. And if they see a trend in reserves going downward and using it every year for budget holes, it's going to get more expensive to borrow money at a time when we're going to eventually need to put phase 2 in this building here, and the senior center, and our debt costs are going to go up. So I would be very cautious in this first year of using over $2 million in reserves to expect that we need to backfill those reserves conservatively. Not overly, but given that this is the first year, maybe next year we'll think differently.
So let's look at this a different way. Yeah.
The 10-12% is the guideline. I guess I feel like, maintaining reserves up around 12% or is overtaxing our taxpayers. 11.2 is fine, and if we had to get a little bit more, come down a little below 11, that's fine too. We're looking at systemic changes that we were going to ask. That meaning, if we're really just buying a year for the boards, I don't see the rating agencies being all that upset. Unless we're, only down 5 or 6%, but we're still within our policy by a long shot. We have another $2 million to go. So we've got, we're 11.2. Worst case scenario, we would be about 10.6 or something if we had a need.
Well, just making the argument that I made 2 weeks ago, which I sort of get, and I get both sides of this. One is, using reserves means we have to fill the hole next year if we in fact expend the money. I get that. But building reserves so that we, if the reserve level is too high, because we have favorable outcomes or whatever it is, which is something we always budget for, then we should use those reserves to stay within our policy. So I think those two things work against each other. But let me suggest something else. What if we ran this a different way, Sean? Run a 5% tax increase. And tell me what that mill rate would be.
5% including the fire district?
Yes.
So just what the mill rate would be?
Well, I want to know what the reserves are afterwards. Yes. Can you do this?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the best way to.
It's your spreadsheet. I know.
All right, so
That's an unfair question.
taking,
So let's split the difference. I'm a big split the difference guy, but, how would you like it analyzed? Let me put it that way. Would you like it as if we were going to only get 31 and no money for the car tax?
I don't think that's realistic.
I don't either. I think we're going to get one or the other.
So I think it was.
So let's use the 650 for the car tax. That's splitting the difference. And a 5% tax increase.
so 5, right.
I'm just looking at it from a purely political perspective, and I know more you're right, but we're just looking at this one little car tax thing, but the politics of it. And that they would have to get legislators, the majority of legislators, to vote to do something that either costs the state more if they make us whole in part or in whole, or costs us, or does nothing for the state. And it pisses off, pardon my language, the vast majority of towns. And it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, yes, it would help some urban folks, but that's, they're doing the damage to the majority of towns already, that to do this additional thing, which doesn't gain them anything politically.
That's the argument, right, for the pension, teachers' pension. Is that the same argument for the car tax, though? Because they already did it.
Well, but the pension thing gains them something. They're pushing costs
Right,
down to us.
right.
With the car tax, they're not saving money.
Right.
So why would they spend the political capital to push that through for a small number of urban districts who are already looking to gain from cross subsidies from the larger number of suburbs? I'm just looking at it politically, and I just don't see it.
Oh, I have, yeah, the mill rate 5% higher would be 40 point,
That said, you know a lot of crap.
No, I understand what you're saying.
I think we need to keep some pressure on the boards in terms of, business, non-business use.
Oh, I agree.
The whole concern to have, are taxing and then it goes in the other direction as Linda says, the government doesn't see what he wants on the car. I don't think it, I agree, it doesn't make sense politically, to give wins all the way around the neighborhood area. It's just not going to happen that way. And then, we're talking about the Kansas landscape, giving them a year to, giving them more notice to stay. We're going to give them some more guidance as well toward next year. So they're going to have a lot of advance notice. I'm a little concerned about it being for and having all that additional cash available in our concern.
So I'm off, I can understand where Linda's coming from and where you're coming from with the car tax. I'm, no disrespect, I'm skeptical that we're really going to have a change in business as usual. I just don't think we're going to see dramatic changes in the Board of Education budget. Ever, and it's counting, to say we have a year, we had a year this year to do
Well,
it.
right.
We knew 9 months ago that the budget
Yeah.
was not going to be good. And we didn't, we got some concessions, but we certainly didn't dramatically change.
So just to, if we were to just say, okay, Jeff's scenario where we are able to push back, where, we are in line with where we want to be with both boards, we've made changes. That doesn't change the fact that we have no idea what's coming from the state. And that's the bigger impact out of all of this. So in terms of overtaxing, Jeff, I mean, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think that there will be changes fundamentally to both boards, the way we do business. But I also think we need to save, not to backfill their budgets, but for the unexpected costs that the state is going to push down on us. They haven't passed the budget this year, and there's no indication that it's going to get better next year. So that's the reason why I would say I'd prefer to, go with the B scenario than to just. And I've actually changed because I think that keeping it under 40 is really important. But if I'm looking at this trajectory of reserves to 10% at the bottom of our range, and then what happens the year after that? Are we saying this is a 2-year problem or like a 5 or year or more problem?
So it's really to compromise that, really, to say that the car tax is going to stay at 36, right? And you still have, you budgeted $5 million in contingencies. Is that still correct? Right? So then at the end of the day, we may have to send out a supplemental bill that comes in over a $5 million shortfall.
So you're saying set the mill rate like 8?
That would be correct.
And
And so this way, we're not necessarily, we're not using reserves, right? And we're not necessarily having additional taxes.
But
that
we're
doesn't-
being optimistic about the car tax.
Correct. That's correct.
What I was trying to do. What?
Using Linda's line of reasoning that politically it makes sense.
And if they screw some
So,
tax, then we'll have.
So we're really arguing over 6 basis points? with the mill rate? Because what I was trying to do was compromise, meet halfway on the car tax and get, I mean, if 4005 works for you guys, then I'm fine with that.
I-
I'm not asking for 4005. Again, I mean, what you're saying is, perhaps last year is more now, and then the year from now, so it's worse the year from now, or we have to go back.
Well, hey, Jeff,
Want to do it again.
Jeff, work with me here for just a minute, all right? I'm just trying to figure out whether the people who want to be ultra-conservative want 40.55 or 40.05.
I'm not 45.
Can I throw in an observation? And I think we have to not only worry about the state, but worry about the impact on the public locally in our town and on potential buyers of our properties and sellers of our properties. And I feel like raising taxes this large amount, I've been the tax hawk all along since I've been on this board, a tax hawk amongst others, that my concern has been that we are the highest mill rate amongst the towns that are our sort of competitor towns. This would really launch us even higher and put us over that, sort of mythical 40. And I'll just tell you a story of the many people who have approached me. Unfortunately, did not write letters, but one of them is a young family, 2 kids. You think they want their kids in our school system? They want to move because they can't afford the taxes. And what they're finding is that the house they own is worth so much less now than when they bought it, and they can't sell it for enough to buy a comparable house in one of our competitor towns that has an equally good school system. And so they're in this sort of house lot situation. They can't afford to stay here, they can't afford to leave, and they're infuriated. And, it becomes a death spiral after a while when you start raising the mill rate, which lowers your property values. So the next revaluation, you have to raise the mill rate even more because it's on a lower property value base, which makes us less competitive because, like it or not, it may not be logical, what realtors look at, that what buyers look at, is what's your mill rate. And they don't do all the math, and we can make all the arguments, but it doesn't filter down to them. And people, I can tell you, I know tons of people who would not buy homes in Simsbury because of our mill rate. So I just feel we're in this death spiral, that if we keep raising taxes, that the gap is growing against our competitor towns, that we are putting ourselves in a position long-term to be in a deep hole and in deep trouble, regardless of what's.
On the flip side, though, you get the people who wrote the letters and say they moved to town for the education system, but they want the taxes to keep going up.
And
here we are.
They did not say that. They said, look for cuts elsewhere.
Well,
Where the heck
there aren't any
is there?
cuts elsewhere.
Well, so that's my point, is that they're saying unrealistic things.
Right.
All right, so let's try to,
People who get on to farming in West Hartford and Blacksburg, they move to those towns with schools as well. People get to the different towns and what they've done. I think the other last thing I want to said that Blacksburg, the Board of Education, not looking at everybody's going to cut. The Board of Education, or the board rather, is West Hartford. They don't, like, I'm so it's all the non-tenured faculty. We are, one of today's staff, essentially, by raising this mill rate, essentially just rolling over every year and saying whatever it is we want for education to be back. Because people who get the education, we know what people who really have the education too, and it's really frustrating to see these other towns educating their kids and get the same board scores for far less. I mean, the basketball is less than West Hartford.
Well, but West Hartford had to send out layoff notices because West Hartford sent off layoff notices because they chose not to try to address the governor's budget,
right, all of which we tried.
which we tried to do. So,
I'd like to bring this sort of back
I
because
was going to say, I'd like to make a motion.
I would appreciate that, Eric.
So, I'll make the motion that we go with sheet A, which would bring the overall combined mill rate to 40.05. Built into that budget, we already have a $5 million contingency for state pushback, whether it be the car tax, whether it be teachers' retirement, or whatnot. And at the end of the day, if the state comes back in and says, you know, you're actually gonna lose $10 million, then we have to send out a supplemental tax bill. But it's really not driven by us, it's driven by the state legislatures and the governors.
All right, so that's a motion. And I
And
need,
then to come back and just $3 million over tax rate.
we wait,
discuss
right now, we're
in a
waiting for a
second.
second. We need a second on this, and then we'll have discussion.
I'll second.
So seconded by Derek Peterson.
All right, now there's by those, sorry,
Yeah,
the car tax, we're not getting the car tax mill rate.
yeah, so that's the first item of discussion, which I will make for the record. We can set the mill rate at 40.05, but we can't, by law, charge 36 mills, 37.5, because that's against the law. All right? Right. So unless that law is repealed and replaced by a new car tax agreement, which would allow us to charge whatever we want, or 37, or 40, we would end up short, all right? Like we did in C, all right? The only difference between C and A is that one has charging what we think we can charge, full amount, and the other is charging what we know is state law, and we get some sort of reimbursement, half of what was predicted.
And that,
But
that
we're
happens
also
only
using
in six
official.
cases.
Yes. Well, no, that's not true. If all we did were those two, they would be exactly the same. They would be, there's a slight, we get from 40.05 to 39.99. There was another $120,000, that's right, yeah, something like that that was taken. And I just did that to say, what would it take to get this mill rate below 40?
Taken from what?
Reserves.
So A is actually not an option. We're not
We
by law
cannot charge
Okay,
37.
so we should get that rid of that.
Right.
So the choices,
The choices are B and C, and the question is, in C, how much should we be taking as if you listen to what the motion that's on the table, that assumes that we get the same amount of money that we charged for. So that's what was in your motion.
That's correct. I figured there'd be some more
Right,
straight.
so A is not what it is, but it's actually D now, which looks like A and C. All right,
So that's D.
so D would be,
It would be that if the state kept the car tax at 36,
Allow it.
allowed us to keep it at.
that's what A is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can vote on the, we have a motion, and I'd like to amend the motion so that it only sets the mill rate at 40.05.
Just to clarify, you're actually setting it at 38.82, the fire district sets the.
Right,
You're saying the global.
Correct, I'm
So the
sorry.
motion will eventually need to be the 38.82 or whatever the
Right,
actual.
correct.
What was it?
38.32 for the town plus 1.23, I'm sorry, wrong page. 38.82 for the town, that's a 4.58% increase. And the 1.23 for the fire district, zero change, combined change of 4.43% increase. in the tax.
The total mill rate would be
40.05.
40.05. And that would be essentially, that would be a difference of $120,000 between that and the other, right?
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff, just hang on a second.
And we're reserving 11.2%. It's one of the worst budget years ever.
That would keep it in reserves at 12%.
What's that?
That would be keeping reserves at 12%, not 11.2.
I don't think they put out 11%. I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Fine. If it's $120,000, then it goes below 40, and then, so the reserves is still 11.99.
We have a fruit salad here, a little bit, but I think we are all saying about the same thing. We have, let me see if I can summarize. We have $5 million of contingencies for state budget, 2.5 in our expense budget, 2.5 in the revenue side. We are assuming on the car tax some dollar reimbursement or our ability to charge at 37 mill rate, one of those two in that possible, and use of our reserves that will leave us at what percentage? 11.9%. 11.9%. And the mill rate would be 39.9
38.76 for the town.
plus 1.3.
For a total of 39.9.
So you can amend your motion.
So
So amended to move it to 39.99. Those assumptions, which are in fact just assumptions.
right.
The only thing we know for sure is that these expense budgets are approved. And the town, the Board of Selectmen's budget has $2.5 million contingency. The actual expenditure of which is pending, right? It's approved. But we'll see what comes out of the final state budget. And where we end up on the ultimate reserve level is very much dependent on all of these expenses. But I think we've been responsible about addressing pushing out.
Summarize. The 39.99 mill rate, what the assumptions are on the car tax.
Well,
You said reserves at 11.99.
Car tax,
Car tax would be.
we either get reimbursed.
we get
We're
funded
worse
in
than it was in scenario.
a moderately rosy
So
scenario,
we're
not a
doing-
fully
we're doing
rosy
the C,
scenario.
The C car tax.
No, more like the 8.
Or like the A.
So not the.
So the amendment, or the motion has been amended to 39.99. Is everybody clear on what, and you second the amendment? Jeff, do you have any other questions, comments, or discussion?
And that would leave the mill rate at 11.9, you say?
The reserves.
11.9 reserves.
Or at almost 12.
Yes.
And then if the car tax comes in less.
If the
than
car tax
12,
comes
we're
in
down
less,
to 11.2.
yeah, we could go down all the way down to 11.2 if we got nothing. That's the plan. So if you want to split the differences, which what I did, it's about 11.5, 11.6.
That's extremely certain. I think that's fine. I appreciate it.
All right.
And just to be clear, and I interrupt, we talked about this earlier, using the reserves would always be the last thing we would do. That, what we're contingency using, assuming the contingency for the state, is better than what we are assuming. I just want to, I know, we
Oh, right.
Reserves go
use the
away.
reserves as we're planning it is
Right.
over and above what
Right now, there's no provision that we can get back part of the mill rate. But not use reserves, our first line of defense. And then ultimately, we would have some flexibility on the expense budgets, but that would be unlikely unless the budget came back and they said, we were just kidding, you get everything you got last year. Didn't mean it.
What you could,
Well, it will take a different form than that, though. It would be, they're upping the income tax and the state tax and the tolls on, that is not an impossible scenario. Yeah. In which case, we will have to get not. All right, so it's been moved and
So this is the final.
Yes.
I.
No, we have to do it tonight.
Yeah, oh, no, I know, but I just wanted to make sure this was the vote, the one
Yeah.
and only vote that we're having tonight. Because I'm quite frankly very torn. I came here not intending to vote for any of this because I am extremely frustrated that we're not doing something more like what Glastonbury did. I think we're flinging a huge tax increase on town folks. I'm very disappointed that the turnout was not better. I don't actually believe the turnout is representative of the town. I think that in the future, we need to have a much better communication plan, because I just know people are gonna go ballistic when they see what kind of increase we're talking about here.
Ask them if they voted.
Yeah, I know that, but unfortunately, they're gonna tell you they didn't know about it, they didn't, see the four signs.
Everything's
that are out there.
televised. There's articles.
It's,
The
Number next year.
superintendent put out emails.
All right, fair enough.
Lisa sent out a letter to everybody, I got the card.
I think there are, we need a better communication plan next year.
I agree.
There's a communication plan that clearly went out from the PTO, and there was nothing else that went out, other than if people get Lisa's email.
But we can't advocate one.
No, we don't have to advocate, we just have to inform. And I don't feel like people are informed, and yes, I understand it's their duty to stay informed, but people lead busy lives, and I think we can do a better job of communicating.
Every year, right? Every year, we're, the next one, the next year, we're doing something on the state side, and hopefully, this gap,
Yeah.
And I appreciate that all of you on this board really have agonized over this. And I know Laura and I were both frustrated, but we couldn't chime in last time because of technological failures. But, I heard all of you, I watched the conversation, and I heard the, statements about that we need to change things. I don't feel like I have a sense of exactly what's going to happen or what are we calling for. We need, and it isn't in the budget, we need a consultant to come in here and work with the three boards and figure out what kind of structural change. I mean, if we're just expecting that somehow magically over the course of the next year, there's going to be massive structural change and process re-engineering.
It's not gonna happen.
It's not going to happen.
Not gonna
And I
happen.
think Maura was right when she said that. So I want to know what we're doing about that.
So that'll be agenda item 1 for August.
Frankly, any structural changes are gonna, to the magnitude we need for the municipalities, are gonna have to come from the state in terms of.
But other towns are just making cuts.
Oh, yes, but of the magnitude that we really need to sustain.
And we're raising the base this year. I mean, we should, in my opinion, should not have allowed increases in a year when we're in deep. Number one rule when you're in a hole is don't dig it deeper, and we're digging deeper.
I think that's part of the reason why we put all the capital projects, large capital projects.
I know,
Done a lot.
everybody did a lot, everybody tried hard. I don't mean to insult anyone, I just don't feel like we're going in the right direction.
All right, any other discussion? So we have a motion that's been moved. I want to be clear that we're approving the town mill rate at 38.76 plus the fire district, which we don't vote on or act, they do their own, but it's set at 1.23. And then we will set the car tax mill rate at 31, which is all we are allowed to do by law, plus the one that goes to the fire district. All right? And then we will hope for appropriate reimbursement or relief from that tax rate out of the final state budget. So those are the two motions. Those are the particulars of the motion that's been made and seconded. So I'll ask for
we
the,
have to vote first on the amended motion, or the original motion, or we just want to revote motion.
we amended the motion and it was seconded, so we can vote on that amended motion. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Record show that Linda voted no and Jeff voted yes. Along with Mr. Crowe, Maura, and Rob and Derek. All right? Is there anything else we have to do tonight? Second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.